Hello and welcome to Chapters, A Life in Books. I'm Hannah MacInnes. Each week I step inside an independent bookshop to meet one of the British Book Awards shortlisted authors and talk about the books that shaped them. In this episode we're joined by Lucy Steeds, debut novelist and one of this year's most exciting new literary voices. Lucy's work has already captured attention for its originality and passion, winning Waterstone's Book of the Year, as well, of course, as being shortlisted for the British Book Award for debut fiction. Lucy, welcome to the podcast and to this beautiful and magical Morocco Bound Books. We're obviously here to discuss The Artist, which congratulations, shortlisted for a British Book Award.
Thank you so much.
And also congratulations because I feel like it's been garnering nominations and awards left, right and centre. We're going to go into the books that shaped your life, that led you to be the author that you are today. Before that, though, can you just tell those listeners who haven't yet had the treat of reading The Artist, tell us what it's about?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you for having me. The Artist is my debut novel, and it is set over really just one summer in 1920 in the south of France. And it's a kind of hot, sticky summer book. And the whole book just takes place in this one crumbling house, and it is the house of this famous but reclusive painter. And he is hidden away from the world. He just creates paintings in solitude and silence. He lives in this house with his niece Etty, who really just is a kind of studio hand, does everything to make the space perfect for him to work. And they have this symbiotic, reclusive relationship in this little house where no one comes until someone does come knocking. And the novel begins with this journalist, Joseph, knocking at the front door because he believes he's been invited to the house to interview the famous painter. When he turns up, it actually transpires that he has not been invited at all. Something's gone wrong, but he is allowed to stay because they make a deal, which is Joseph, this journalist, can write about the painter as long as he stays and poses for a painting. And so this summer begins where one person is writing about the other, one person is painting the other, and then there is a third person, a woman, in the background. And it's about these three people trapped in this sticky house over the summer.
I mean, it's quite hard to just leave it there. So many questions, but I'm going to. And people who, as I say, haven't read it, obviously can find out the rest. But let's go back because we just want to work out what it was that led you to being in this situation of being shortlisted, winning all and nominated for so many awards. Can you remember your first book-shaped, book-related memory?
Yes, so many of my childhood memories revolved around books, but I think my earliest were to do with Roald Dahl. I really remember the texture and the feel and the look of those books because Roald Dahl, all his books were illustrated by Quentin Blake. Did you have those ones as well? Where I remember reading The Enormous Crocodile. It was like beautifully illustrated with these, like on every page, there'd be these colorful illustrations by Quentin Blake. So there was a kind of already a relationship between image and text, even very early on. And there's also a darkness in Roald Dahl's books that I really like, or just clearly that just was quite fun as a child. The Enormous Crocodile, that's the one about the crocodile that wants to eat all the children. So he goes and disguises himself as a seesaw in the playground so they all come and sit on him. And it's always about him trying to eat these children. So I love those Roald Dahl books that just have a little bit of darkness. It's usually about children trying to do horrible things to adults. I remember James and the Giant Peach. Again, great illustrations in that one. That's about James trying to get away from his horrible aunts, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker. Yeah. Matilda, great one. George's Marvelous Medicine, where he makes that horrible concoction for his grandmother. Yeah, just loads of really sort of slightly dark, slightly spiky, exuberant tales for children with these gorgeous Quentin Blake illustrations.
Yeah, those illustrations are so evocative.
So vivid, yeah.
So is one of those the book that you most adored as a child, would you say? Was that something different?
The ones I adored, I loved the Series of Unfortunate Events books, which when I was a little bit older, I think they're maybe for sort of age 7 up, and there are 13 of those. It's a really long series. But those, again, they have this slight spikiness to them where they are about these 3 siblings and their attempts to outrun Count Olaf, this evil person who's trying to get their fortune. But it's just Lemony Snicket wrote them with this really sharp eye towards what children like and what makes children tick. And it was this idea that he would use really adult words. And I think that's what's really exciting as a child when you're reading, is when you come across words that you're not meant to know what they mean, but he will just explain what they mean in the text. So he'll say something like, oh, I remember in the first chapter, someone comes along to the children and says, your parents have perished. Perished means burned to death in a fire. And so you learn words like this. And I really remember listening to these books on tape, and we listened to it in the car with my parents once. And my parents were like, this is horrible. These poor children. This is such a really sad book. And my sister and I were like, no, it's really funny. But that strange plane of reality you exist on as a child, where you can just absorb lots of things and take it at a strange field value.
It's so interesting hearing you describe that, because I think when I was reading The Artist, I just thought again and again, you have the most extraordinary way with words. I just felt like I was learning new words. They were just so invested in the language reading that. Is there a book or perhaps an author that you think made you realise this is what you wanted to do, or inspired you, made you believe that you could?
Ooh, I think every single book you read inspires you in some way, or it influences you, whether you're conscious of it or not. So there was not necessarily one specific author that made me feel like I could. And I actually don't think I went into writing a book knowing I could do it. It was very much a journey of discovery in the writing. But there are some authors which are a lot more galvanizing than others, I suppose. I think what it always comes back to for me is those writers who are fascinated by language and what it can do, and its malleability and its flexibility. So I love writers that clearly take delight and pleasure in language. And they're quite various. So I mean, one of my great passions is John Donne, the poet, the 16th century poet, because he has this very metaphysical relationship with language, and he transforms it and clearly just delights in it in his poetry. And then for prose writers, people like Donna Tartt, I think, I love that her books are very large, they're very dense, and clearly she just takes pleasure in dropping you into a world and furnishing it with so many words that really build up this world, and she doesn't hold back at all.
Does it come naturally to you using with language, or do you have to think about it carefully to make sure it's rich?
I'd say both, in that it comes naturally, but I love thinking about it. I think about it very carefully because I always want precision in my writing. So I always want to find the most perfect word. I rarely use words like wonderful or beautiful because they're not precise. I like the sharpness of something by focusing on, rather than beauty, maybe the texture of it or the smell or a specific thing about its shape or color or the way it feels in the hand. There's always like more precision that you can do. I think that's what I always try and go for in my writing, just one layer deeper, one layer more precise.
That is very good advice. Do you try and bring the same thing into your conversation? I often think, why am I using the word wonderful, brilliant again and again?
Yes, I think so. And again, I just love words and love using as many of them as possible rather than reverting to the same ones. But it's very interesting that I think everyone has those blind spots, those words they always come back to. And then if you probably heard yourself, if you had an out-of-body experience and heard yourself speaking, you'd be like, oh, wow, she uses that word all the time.
It's also somewhat easier to put it on the page than sometimes it is to sort of use a word like enchanting instead of wonderful, because you might sound a little lofty in conversation.
Although I also think that relationship between the printed word and the spoken word, I always want that relationship to be a very close one. So when I write, I always read my work aloud, again, because you hear those oral echoes, those ways where even if you haven't used the same word, you've maybe used the same sound a lot, and you think, oh, what looks quite good on a page actually feels very clumsy in the mouth. And I think it's very important because a lot of people listen to books as audiobooks nowadays, and it's really nice if it also sounds good on the ear as well as just looking nice on the page with your eye.
So we're going to move on to what I think is quite a tricky question. It's this hypothetical situation in which one of your friends has never read a book. At least I hope it's hypothetical, but you never know. You just imagine they've lived in a society that's banned books, but now they've escaped from it. They come to you. I can read my first ever book. What would you tell them to read?
I love this question because it's not even hypothetical, because I often, people are in book slumps. Often they'll be like, I haven't been able to finish a book or get into a book for ages. And I have some surefire old faithfuls that I always recommend. And these are the books where I have recommended them to people and they've never let me down. So the first one is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which is a really difficult book to talk about because the only way to understand what this book is about is to read it. And it's a book where you are enveloped into the world of Piranesi so wholly and totally. And really the book is about what the hell is going on in this book. But Susanna Clarke just executes it so perfectly. Roughly, it's about a man in a sort of house where the walls are shifting. But it's about so much more than that. And everyone I've recommended it to loves that. Other absolute surefire ones are The Secret History by Donna Tartt, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which is about video games. And whenever I recommend it to people, often they say, well, I'm not interested in video games. And I'm like, yeah, but you will be after this. And it's such a great book because she frames it as video games are just another means of storytelling. And if you think of a video game as a way of telling a story, it's such an incredible metaphor for all the things our characters go through in this book. So that's just a really beautiful and fun one.
Just don't tell the kids. They'll be telling around, no, but video games are just another way of storytelling.
I kind of do agree, but it's quite active. Video games are an active way of engaging in storytelling because you actually can engage with it. It's more active than, for example, watching TV.
So is it one of those books or something different that if you had your desert island book, the only one you could take with you? I'm guessing it would be one of those, would it?
I actually would go back to John Donne for this because if I was stuck on a desert island, I would want something that would sustain me for the rest of my life. Yeah. And I think Donne's poems are such puzzles. They're real puzzles where you can revisit one of his poems 20 times and you'll be cracking it open and finding new things after all that time. And it's he does everything from the big things to the small things. So the huge existential questions of life and love and death to tiny little beautiful metaphors. So I think his collected poems would sustain me on my desert island.
Right. If we were on desert island, I'd be like, it's yours again. But we're not. So we're going to move on to the next one, which I think, again, I love this question and I really intrigued to hear what your answer is about a book that perhaps changed your mind about something or a perspective about the world, made you see things differently, which obviously books can do better than anything else, perhaps.
Firstly, I think minds are there to be changed, and my mind changes probably with every book I read in some small way. But thinking back on a book that really starkly changed my mind, I remember when I was writing The Artist, I read this book. It's a little, very small Swedish book called The Myth of Wu Tao-tzu by the Swedish philosopher Sven Lindqvist. And it is a book about the relationship between people and images. And it's about how we exist with images and live with images. And the bit that just completely flipped my perspective on things was at the very beginning of the book, he talks about being a child in the 1930s in Sweden. And he just said, when I was a child, there weren't images. And he says, maybe once a month, his father would subscribe to Life magazine and a new magazine would come through the door. And he would then have images for a month. He would be able to look through the pages of this magazine. And he just said, and I would live in those images because I didn't have new images. There weren't pictures everywhere the way there are now. And he just describes this thing of living in the pages of this magazine until he got a new one in the next month. And it really made me think about how nowadays, I mean, if you want to see a picture of anything, you can just Google it and see it within 2 seconds. And if that thing doesn't exist, you could, like anything, you can see an image of it. And it made me really think about what would the world be like where you didn't just have this readiness of images and that way of that childlike way he describes just living inside an image, because I don't think we do that as much now, because you can see probably 1,000 images like on posters, billboards, picture books, like everything. There are so many images everywhere and you can summon them at your will, but he just describes this scarcity, and it really changed my perspective on what it must have been like to exist alongside images back then.
I guess also it sounds like it really made you appreciate the image much more and cherish it in a way that perhaps you just take for granted.
Yes, and it was also such a useful exercise in taking yourself back into the past and into the mindset of someone in the past, because as someone who writes historical fiction, I'm always trying to capture that mindset of being in the past and not to place sort of 21st century people in the past and to think, okay, what are the actual differences that you would note between now and then? And a thing I really feel is this desire to capture the modernity of the past, by which I mean at any point in history, the people who were alive then were the most modern people ever to exist. So in 1931 in rural Sweden, Life magazine having coloured pictures would have been incredible. That would have been the most technologically advanced and exciting thing. Whereas now we might think that's sort of very old news. So I really wanted to capture this idea of the modernity of the past. Whereas now we might look back on it and think, oh, 100 years ago, things were so sort of dusty and fusty. But I wanted things to feel fresh and exciting.
Yeah, when you say that, you realise you definitely, certainly achieved that with the location and where we are in your book. And maybe it's 1930s Sweden or possibly somewhere different as your answer to the next chapter, which is about a literary world you can escape to. Right now, quite a good time to escape to a literary world, I feel. Where would you go?
This is such a great
You have
question.
to come back.
Okay.
But you can go for a day or so.
Okay, I would love to spend one day before the danger encroached in the world of Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, but the first book, specifically the first book, by which I mean the slightly archaic, magical Oxford where everyone has a demon.
I've been there.
I want a demon for a day. I want to have an animal with me. I want to have a little pet animal with me at all times who is also me and is part of me and running around magical Oxford, but before everything gets dark and scary.
I'd love to be able to say, it's yours. Yeah. And I also feel that it's so interesting when you say that, because it makes you realise what an extraordinary writer he is, because I feel like I've spent many days there.
Yes.
Again, this might link into this question, but it might be the same character or a different one that you feel you've fallen in love with the most.
Oh, such a good question. One I really loved just spending time with on a page and who I missed when I finished the book was Ulysses Temper in Still Life. Have you read Still Life by Sarah Winman? Yeah. Everyone makes that noise in that face.
Yeah. I think I would also escape into that world and fall in love with him myself. So yeah,
he's just
a good answer.
The most beautiful human, by which I mean, I think he's handsome, but also just a beautiful soul and person. And that book is so fascinating because everyone in it is good. There's not really a threat in that book. It's like 600 pages long, but it is gripping. And whenever I recommend it to people, this is another one of my old faithfuls, I always just say, it's just good things happening to good people in Italy. And yet you are like holding that book white-knuckled so tightly. So I think I really fell in love with Ulysses Temper. He's so good, and good in a way that I think is actually interesting, because goodness in fiction can often feel either quite toothless or sort of painfully noble. But actually goodness is a really interesting characteristic, and Ulysses's goodness shines through in his love for his friends and the kid called the kid, and that's the beautiful life he creates in Italy.
I mean, preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
And it's what you say is extraordinary about that book, because it is about good things, as you say, having good people in a beautiful place. Everything is sort of, it's a feel-good book, but yet it's not remotely saccharine or, it's beautiful and brilliant and heartbreaking as well, but it's very clever.
And contains all of life in that book.
I think it's another very good book for the moment. It's the book I think I wish I hadn't read now. I would love to be diving into that for the first time.
It's a real book to press into people's hands. My grandmother pressed it into my hand and my sister's girlfriend, and we have since pressed it into other people's. And it's the sort of one where you share it with people. And then I went around to my friend's house and she just held up a stack of it and was like, I'm giving it away, just to friends and people who need it.
Yes, it is. It's a balm book.
Yes.
Okay, less positive then, because we've been in Oxford and we've been in Sarah Winman's beautiful Italy. What about somewhere that was unsettling and unnerving and you really wouldn't want to stick around in that either world or any book that made you feel that?
This is a great question. And I think some of the most unsettling experiences also go back to childhood, when you don't quite know how to identify your feelings. And one of the most unsettling books I remember from reading as a child was Kensky's Kingdom by Michael Morpurgo. Have you read that? It's a great book. It is about
I haven't.
a little boy who goes on a round the world sailing trip with his parents, just his parents and him and his dog in a boat. And then this terrible storm destroys the boat when they're crossing the Pacific, and he washes up on an island. His parents are gone. He and his dog wash up on this island, and the only other thing happening to the island is a Japanese soldier from World War II. These Japanese soldiers who were never told that the war ended. So this island is still being defended by an old Japanese soldier many decades after the war, and then this boy washes up. And the eerie part of this book that I remember, that was really unsettling, is before he actually meets the soldier, he's sort of washed up and near dead on this beach, and the monkeys come and watch him. And just the most unsettling thing was these monkeys watching this half-dead boy.
This is a children's book.
Yes, children's book by...
have to deal with a lot as children. When I think of what I read and had to watch, it was heavy.
But weirdly...
Obviously, Michael Morpurgo is a genius.
He is, but what's so funny is that the traumatic sort of parents washed away when the boat was destroyed in a storm, that was less traumatic than just being watched by an orangutan on a beach. And there is something... My unsettling streak in fiction is... monkeys in fiction, very unsettling. Also in Northern Lights, Mrs. Coulter's demon, the golden monkey, the most terrifying character in that book. It's the only demon without a name. There is something really unsettling about this monkey, and I think it's something to do with... Okay, Freud has this theory about the uncanny. Freud's theory of the uncanny is that the most unsettling things are not things that are incredibly strange, monsters that are totally different from what you would ever see. The most uncanny thing is something that resembles something you're familiar with, but is just a little bit off. And it's why China dolls are unsettling and clowns are unsettling. It's things that look human-like but are a little bit off. And I think monkeys do that too. That anthropomorphic quality that they have is just unsettling. And I remember that from Kensuke's Kingdom. I remember it from Northern Lights.
So true. That is exactly what unnerving is. It's not so far-fetched as to be unbelievable. It's just that tiny bit.
It's looking in a mirror and something's a little bit wrong. It's that.
So what about, and again, this might be one that's come up because you've definitely peppered the conversation with some classics, but is there a book that you read again or again and again that you can just go back to, start cover to cover?
Yeah, well, firstly, I love rereading. And one thing I do whenever I read is I always have a pen in my hand and I scribble all over books when I read them. Sorry to people who can't bear that. But
don't worry, my books are a disaster at the end.
Yeah, they look well loved. But then when I reread them, it's really fun coming back to my previous self and finding things that clearly meant something to me once upon a time. And then I reread them and I'm like, oh, that means nothing. But now I find something else in here. And the author in the book I always come back to again and again is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, because that, again, such a slim book, but contains the most profound emotions and terrors of just the human condition in such slim, spare writing, really economical writing. He's not spare as in anemic. He's really detailed, but again, that specificity with language where he just always chooses the most devastating word or the most terrifying way of describing something. And Giovanni's Room is a book that really rewards just rereading and rereading, especially I think if you're a writer or interested in writing, because it just teaches you how to be so devastatingly precise and sparse with your writing.
That is also such a good recommendation. I feel like James Baldwin's writing in general, everyone should probably go and read and reread
absolutely.
If they haven't already.
Yes, he's a genius.
What about, do you think we've covered a book that's a comfort? Would you say that was Sarah Winman, or is there another sort of a balm, a really escapist, calming book?
An absolute balm would be the Cazalet Chronicles, which are 5 books by Elizabeth Jane Howard. And 5 books is amazing because you can just pick up any one and just get into them. But they are basically an intergenerational family saga, mainly taking place in one house. It's lots of like, all the cousins go down to this house at holidays and everyone spends the time there. And it's just this beautiful, so many pages, but like you could dip into it whenever, because those books feel like opening up a doll's house. You open up the book and you can go into the attic and see what the maids are doing. You can go into the kitchen and see who's cooking there. You can go into the greenhouse, see who's having an affair, go into the dining room and see what's happening. And like you just learn, you go into like the 3-year-old's drama with who's like ignoring who and who's stolen what. You go into all the adults who are all having affairs with each other. You go into the cousins, you go into the grandparents, like you just see all the different members of the family, and you can just sort of pick what bit of the house, what bit of the garden who you're going to drop into for a few pages. And that it just feels like old people I know, just like the old friends. Go back to the gang, see what's going on.
Okay, these are good recommendations because we all need the balm books, I think. This is a quick fire.
Okay.
You can sit down with an author for a coffee or wine. Who is it?
Catherine Rundle, so we can talk about John Donne.
Fine. You've answered the second question. I've been thinking about her a lot when you're talking about John Donne, thinking I think he would be really happy to know about the future, his future fans in the two of you. Okay, and you talk about John Donne.
Yes,
so we've said
Join Passion, John Donne.
And amongst the books that we've spoken about, or perhaps a different one, and it is a big and a lofty question, but a book that you just feel, that book changed me, changed my life.
So, oh gosh, all of them. The Secret History was just such an eye-opening book to read as a teenager, to be like, things can be really, really fun.
And what about The Artist, a book that you read that you think perhaps most inspired that? And there's a lot, I feel like a lot of rich literary tradition coming through. I know I've made my guesses as to what I think, or perhaps heard you say, but one particular book that inspired that?
Again, so many, but one I will recommend is called This Dark Country by Rebecca Birrell, and it just goes into the unseen labour behind paintings, and it's really, really interesting.
Okay, brilliant. And, I mean, this is the hardest question of all, I think, but you are a judge, and you can give your chosen award to one book, your chosen British Book Award. What would you do that?
Okay, I would be lobbying for a new category altogether.
Okay.
And I would be lobbying for the translated fiction category. And then I've read so many good translated books over the past year, but one I loved was Watching Over Her by Jean-Baptiste Andrea, translated by Frank Wynne. That is just beautiful. It is about a sculptor in early 20th century Italy, and it just takes you all the way through the 20th century and the highs and many lows of this person's life.
You've taken us to so many different worlds in this conversation. I absolutely love it. Okay, so that's your new category. You never know who might be listening. It might happen for another year.
Happy to judge.
And I was going to ask you what you're currently reading, but I feel like, how many books do you read at once?
A lot, because I never don't finish a book. I always just put it aside and mentally go, well, I'll pick that up again in a week, a month, a year.
You really didn't like it?
Then it's problems with me often, so I'll come back to it. And often
always finish.
Yeah, pretty much. If I didn't get into it the first time, I'll put it aside. And there are books that have been put aside for several years, but I'm like, I will come back to that and one day I'll be able to read it. But one of the ones I'm reading at the moment is The Door by Magda Szabó, the Hungarian writer. And that's really good. Again, it's women in a house and something's afoot.
And when you're reading, where are you? Is it always in the same place? You have a sort of certain scenario you must be in or prefer to be in to be reading?
Silence is nice. I'm very bad at concentrating if there's things going on around me. But no, can read pretty much anywhere. My superpower on road trips is I can read in the car. So I will often read aloud like a live action audiobook. But truly anywhere. On the train,
on the train, in the silent carriage.
Yeah, exactly. Shooting eyes at people who are talking loudly.
I mean, I'm very sad to say that I think the conversation has come to an end. I have now walked away with so many books that you've recommended that I haven't yet delved into, and all these worlds you've taken us to. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was a joy.